Good evening. You are watching the news from the Sultanate of Oman Television. First, the headlines. Omani Hajj mission stresses that unlicensed and unapproved Hajj campaigns will not enter Saudi Arabia. UN Security Council approves investigations in chemical attacks in Syria and Moscow are to support Damascus to face Daesh. And Germany calls to find justice mechanism for distribute refugees in Europe. Those were the headlines. Now for the news in detail. Omani Hajj mission stressed and clarified that a number of pilgrims who came to Saudi Arabia with fake documents from organizers which were not licensed by the Ministry of Endowments and Religious Affairs and not carrying the necessary permissions to perform Hajj were refused entry through the kingdom's Al-Batha border post as pilgrims. The mission stressed that after contacting with the pilgrims and their names verification, it turned out that they were not officially registered at the Saudi e-gate for Hajj. Therefore, the Hajj mission was unable to help these pilgrims as an official quota of only 11,200 pilgrims were allocated this year for the Sultanate. The mission called all citizens to ensure before leaving the Sultanate that they are with licensed groups and asked the campaigners to hand over to them the pilgrims' smart card before traveling. Houthi rebels fired Katyusha rockets at a busy market in Yemen's eastern city of Ma'rib, killing at least 20 people today. The attack came hours after the Arab-led coalition airstrike killed 7 rebels in Ma'rib, where Apache helicopters have also joined the fight against Houthi insurgents and their allies. Military sources said the coalition strike targeted a military vehicle used by the rebels in Ma'rib province, while other air raids targeted rebel positions in neighboring Shabwa. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said today that the coordination was needed between Russia's military and the Pentagon to avoid unintended incidents around Syria, where both countries have a military presence. Lavrov said Russia would continue to supply weapons to Syrian government to help the Syrian armed forces fight against the Daesh group. He said Russia was conducting military exercises in the Mediterranean Sea for some time and that they were in line with the international law. Lavrov said the Pentagon had suspended operational cooperation with the Russian military, but that this should be resumed since both the U.S. military and Russia's armed forces were operating in and around Syria. He also said that Russia ships with both humanitarian aid and military equipment to Syria by air at a time when Washington is putting pressure on nearby states to deny their airspace to Russian flights. The UN Security Council is approving a groundbreaking international investigative body that will be allowed to establish who is responsible for chemical attacks in Syria for the first time. Until now, the UN and the Global Chemical Weapons Watchdog, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, were only able to investigate attacks without laying blame on the government or rebels. The new body is the result of rare cooperation between the United States and Russia on Syria's conflict, which is well into its 5th year. A council diplomat speaking on condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to speak publicly said no council member on Thursday objected to a letter to Secretary General Ban Ki-moon in support of the UN OPCW joint investigative mechanism. A rebel group stormed Syria's largest prison today, seizing 2 buildings in the complex near Damascus amid heavy fighting. The rebels launched an offensive on Wednesday on the regime-held Adra prison complex, which lies in the eastern Ghouta suburb of Damascus, capturing a hilltop before seizing part of the facility. At least 5,000 prisoners are being held at the facility, almost twice its capacity of about 3,000 prisoners. When the rebels announced their upcoming offensive, security personnel in the women's section fled, taking the female detainees with them. The prison in Adra has been targeted in the past by heavy rocket fire, and last month at least 11 people were killed and 56 wounded when rockets fell outside the prison. Germany calls to find justice mechanism for distribute refugees in Europe as hundreds of migrants queued by the railroad tracks today at a congested border crossing to pass from Greece into Macedonia. Migrants are flowing in increasing numbers through the Balkan Peninsula towards Hungary as Greece ferries them from inundated islands to Athens, from where they head north to the Macedonian border. Some 7,600 migrants entered Macedonia from Greece, according to the United Nations Refugee Agency. Crossing Greece is just one of the many challenges facing the migrants in Europe. At least 850,000 people are expected to cross the Mediterranean seeking refuge in Europe this year and the next, the UN said. The United Nations General Assembly has decided that the flags of non-member observer states, including Palestine, shall be raised at the world body's headquarters and offices following the flags of its 193 member states. The resolution raising the flags of non-member observer states at the United Nations was adopted by a vote of 119 in favor to 8 against, with 45 delegations abstaining. The text also requested Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to take the measures necessary for the implementation of this decision during the Assembly's 70th session, which begins on September 15th and within 20 days of the adoption of the resolution. A Republican-backed measure to derail the Iran nuclear agreement was blocked in the U.S. Senate in a major foreign policy victory for Democratic President Barack Obama. The vote was 58-42 against, clearing the way for the debate of the bill, meaning opponents of the nuclear pact failed to get the 60 votes necessary to advance a resolution of disapproval. All 42 of the votes not to advance the measure were from Democrats or independents who normally vote with them. 4 Democratic senators voted with Republicans to move ahead. Still to come in our news bulletin. The Polish town of Chesney hosts the 2015 European Rover Challenge.
السلام عليكم. دوبيزل اللي تثقوا فيه في عمان صار اسمه أوليكس، وراح يظل أسهل وأسرع طريقة عشان تبيعوا أغراضكم أونلاين. حملوا تطبيق أوليكس، صوروا الغرض وحطوا الصورة. الإعلان مجاني، ما تدفعوا أي عمولة، والقبض من المشتري نقدا.
مع أوليكس البيع والشراء والأسهل.
Welcome back to the news from the Sultanate of Oman television. The UN peace envoy for Libya, Bernardino Leon, said the latest round of peace talks launched yesterday in Morocco could prove to be the moment of truth. He said in Shukrat, near the Moroccan capital, that they are starting a new round of talks in the Libya process, which they hope will be the final round. Leon's peace plan calls for an accord to be reached by September 20th, ahead of the United Nations General Assembly, with the government coming into force a month later. Singaporeans voted in the most hotly contested election in the country's history after massive turnouts at opposition rallies boosted chances that a two-party system will emerge from half a century of domination by the ruling party. The People's Action Party, PAP, is widely expected to retain a clear majority in the 89-seat parliament. The elections department said 1.15 million out of 2.46 million eligible voters had cast their ballots by noon. The elections are being held amid an economic slowdown in the trade-reliant city-state. Floods that swept houses off their foundations and crushed others under landslides spread across Japan today as more rivers burst their banks, leaving at least 23 people missing, including 2 children, and forcing more than 100,000 to flee. A severe rain warning remained in effect for parts of northern Japan, but floodwaters were slowly retreating in the worst-hit city of Joso after toppling trees and washing houses away. At least 30 bags filled with grass and other materials removed in the cleanup of contaminated fields in a village near the destroyed Fukushima nuclear plant were washed away from where they were stored, but most were recovered undamaged and none of their contents had leaked, Kyodo News Agency reported. The Seismology Center affiliated to Sultan Qaboos University recorded this morning a mild earthquake on 2.5 Richter scale in the south of Al Amrat Wilaya in the governorate of Muscat. The epicenter of the quake was 6 kilometers away from Al Amrat city, which was felt by a number of people in the area. The center also said that such mild tremblers will not cause any damage, and it added that it did not receive any complaints. Poland has made considerable strides in high-tech space development since joining the European Space Agency in 2007, and the Polish team showed off their skills as the country hosted the 2015 Mars rover competition in the southern city of Chesney. Here is a report.
These Mars rovers are built for terrain many millions of kilometers away, but today, Chęciny in southern Poland is the training ground. 27 teams from universities around the world are showing off their rovers in the 2015 European Rover Challenge. Guided from afar, the machines have 30 minutes to complete 4 tasks: pick up an object, measure a reactor's power parameters, obtain samples of soil, and navigate between craters using only a GPS.
Many parts of our rover were made using 3D printers. These mechanical parts are mostly in the rover's arms, but when you look closely, you can see them all over.
Unfortunately, one of their rover's wheels caught fire just a few meters after the start line. It's a small setback for the local team, though Polish skills routinely dominate international Mars rover contests, and Poles are among the world's top 10 global robot manufacturers.
Poland's membership in the European Union and the European Space Agency is very recent. Before that, we had 1 or 2 generations of dreamers who would have wanted to work in the field of astronautics but weren't able to. Today, it's like the effect of a compressed spring that's just been released.
The honorary guest at this year's competition is U.S. astronaut Harrison Schmitt. In 1972, he was the first civilian and the last man to set foot on the moon. Today, he is excited about future exploration of the red planet.
Having explored a valley on the moon called Taurus Littrow, I can think of all sorts of things that I would like to direct a robot now to go check out, to add to the information that we gathered on Apollo 17.
Canada was the overall winner of this year's competition, securing both first and third place. But every participant is a winner when it comes to employment prospects. These days, robots are used by the Army, police, firemen, and even anyone vacuuming a house. No need to shoot for Mars, then, for these engineers to secure a job.
Now for the general weather forecast. Partly cloudy skies will prevail over the coastal and mountainous areas of the Governorate of Dhofar, with chances of cloud accumulation and scattered rainfall accompanied by hail over the Hajan Mountains and the nearby areas. Rest of the Sultanate will have clear skies. Winds will be northeasterly light to moderate along the coast of the Sea of Oman, while it will be southerly to southwesterly light to moderate along the rest of the Sultanate. Seas along the coast of the Arabian Sea will be moderate with a maximum wave height of 2 meters, and the rest of the coast it will be slight with a maximum wave height of 1.25 meters. This is the Sultanate of Oman television. Before we end tonight's bulletin, here are the main points once again. Omani Hajj mission stresses that unlicensed and unapproved Hajj campaigns will not enter Saudi Arabia. UN Security Council approves investigations in chemical attacks in Syria and Moscow are to support Damascus to face Daesh. And Germany calls to find justice mechanism for distribute refugees in Europe. With that, we come to the end of tonight's news bulletin. From all of us here at the newsroom and the studios, it's good night.